Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Miran Arsanios, and I am the social media director here at the Griffin Poetry Prize. Just before we begin, I wanted to acknowledge that I'm joining you tonight from Brooklyn, the unceded land of the Munsina Lapi people who continue to steward and care for the land. I'm here tonight with my colleague Adriana Onita, who welcomed you earlier, who is the editorial director of the Griffin Poetry Prize, and our very special guests, Dunya Mikhail and Ani Gjika. Thank you all so much for being here this evening for a second iteration of Translation Talks, which is a conversation series about translation and poetry, where Griffin Poetry Prize shortlisted and winning authors are invited to discuss their craft and, in particular, the relationship between translation and poetry. So our first Translation Talks event had Sarah Riggs and Khalid Matawa as guests, and tonight we have Dunya and Ani. So for some background, the Griffin Poetry Prize is one of the few international literary prizes that celebrates poetry written in or translated into English. Over the last 2 decades, we have had 20 translated collections shortlisted for the prize, works that were originally written in language such as Albanian, Arabic, Danish, French, Hebrew, German, Korean, Mandarin Chinese, Polish, and Spanish. So we're very proud of that tradition and excited to host our 2 poets translators tonight, Dunya and Ani. Thank you both so much for accepting our invitation and for being here with us tonight. And I will pass it over to Adriana.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Miren, and welcome, everyone. My name is Adriana Onita, and I'm the editorial director of the Griffin Poetry Prize. And we're so thrilled to see so many community members gather here today online for this intercultural event. And we would like to acknowledge that the Griffin Poetry Prize was founded in Toronto, Canada, on the traditional land of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are thankful to have the opportunity to live and work in connection to this land. And I'm also grateful to Treaty 6 territory in Edmonton, Alberta, Amisquachi, Waskahikan, where I am from as well. So please join us in the chat and share with us where you're joining from today, which Indigenous territories and cities you're joining us from today. I see that there are people on this side of the world from in Tirana, Albania, and also in North America. So we will proceed with this event, respecting these lands, these languages, and all of our relations. So without further ado, let me introduce our special guests for this evening. I'm thrilled to do so. Ani Gjika is an Albanian-born poet, literary translator, and author of Bread on Running Waters, out with Fenway Press. And her translation of Luljeta, Lleshanaku's Negative Space, out with Bloodaxe and New Directions, was shortlisted for the 2019 International Griffin Poetry Prize. And Ani is a recipient of several awards and fellowships, including the National Endowments for the Arts, the English Pen, the Robert Pinsky Global Fellowship, and most recently, the Restless Books 2021 Prize for New Immigrant Writing for her forthcoming memoir, which will be published in 2023. And Ani is joined tonight by none other than Dunya Mikhail, who is an Iraqi American poet and writer. And she has received many accolades too, including the United States Artist Fellowship, the Guggenheim Fellowship, the Kresge Fellowship, an Arab American Book Award, and the UN Human Rights Award for Freedom of Writing. She is the first contemporary Iraqi woman poet translated into English. And her book, The War Works Hard, New Directions, translated by Elizabeth Winslow, was shortlisted for the 2006 International Griffin Poetry Prize. New Directions published 3 of her other poetry books and her nonfiction book, The Beekeeper, which was a finalist for the National Book Award and the PEN John Kenneth Galbraith Award. Her debut novel, The Bird Tattoo, shortlisted for the International Prize for Arabic Fiction, is coming out this year, this December 2022, from Pegasus. Dunya currently works as a special lecturer of Arabic at Oakland University in Michigan. So we will begin our evening with a brief poetry reading from their Griffin shortlisted collection. So first by Dunya, who will read some poems from The War Works Hard in the original Arabic and the English translation, followed by Ani Gjika, who will read Luljeta Lleshanaku's poems in the original Albanian and her English translations from the collection Negative Space. So Dunya, we welcome you to our virtual stage, and we're delighted that you're with us.
I'm delighted as well. Thank you so much, Adriana, for the introduction, and thank you, Maren, for also your welcoming, and thank you all for coming. Happy to be with you here, and happy to share the stage, stage, with you, Ani, as well. So you mentioned, well, the War Works Hard. I will read today. I'll start with the Arabic. Or should I start with the English?
Up to you.
Okay. الحرب تعمل بجد. كم هي مجدة الحرب ونشطة وبارعة. منذ الصباح الباكر توقظ صفارات الإنذار. تبعث سيارات إسعاف إلى مختلف الأمكنة. تؤرجح جثثا في الهواء. تزحلق نقالات إلى الجرحى. تستدعي مطرا من عيون الأمهات. تحفر في التراب. تخرج أشياء كثيرة من تحت الأنقاض. أشياء جامدة براقة وأخرى باهتة ما زالت تنبض. تأتي بالمزيد من الأسئلة إلى أذهان الأطفال. تسلي الآلهة بإطلاق صواريخ وألعاب نارية في السماء. تزرع الألغام في الحقول. تحصد ثقوبا وفقاعات. تدفع عوائل إلى الهجرة. تقف مع رجال الدين وهم يشتمون الشيطان. المسكين يده ما زالت في النار تؤلمه. الحرب تواصل عملها صباح مساء. تلهم طغاة لإلقاء خطب طويلة. تمنح الجنرالات أوسمة والشعراء موضوعا للكتابة. تساهم في صناعة الأطراف الاصطناعية. توفر طعاما للذباب. تضيف صفحات إلى كتاب التاريخ. تحقق المساواة بين القاتل والقتيل. تعلم العشاق كتابة الرسائل. تدرب الفتيات على الانتظار. تملأ الجرائد بالمواضيع والصور. تشيد دورا جديدة لليتامى. تنشط صانعي التوابيت. تربت على أكتاف حفاري القبور. ترسم ابتسامة على وجه القائد. إنها تعمل بجد لا مثيل له، ومع هذا لا أحد يمتدحها بكلمة. The war works hard. How magnificent the war is, how eager and efficient. Early in the morning, it wakes up the sirens and dispatches ambulances to various places, swings corpses through the air, rolls stretchers to the wounded, summons rain from the eyes of mothers, digs into the earth, dislodging many things from under the ruins. Some are lifeless and glistening. Others are pale and still throbbing. It produces the most questions in the minds of children, entertains the gods by shooting fireworks and missiles into the sky, sows mines in the fields, and reaps punctures and blisters, urges families to immigrate, stands beside the clergymen as they curse the devil. Poor devil, he remains with one hand in the searing fire. The war continues working day and night. It inspires tyrants to deliver long speeches, awards medals to generals, and themes to poets. It contributes to the industry of artificial limbs, provides food for flies, adds pages to the history books, achieves equality between killer and killed, teaches lovers to write letters, accustoms young women to waiting, fills the newspapers with articles and pictures, builds the new houses for the orphans, invigorates the coffin makers, gives grave diggers a pat on the back, and paints a smile on the leader's face. The war works with unparalleled diligence, yet no one gives it a word of praise. I'm gonna read just one small. Thank you. Just one small section. I read. This was from The War Works Hard. I read from In Her Feminine Sign, which is the recent poetry book. I read section 11, small section from tablets 5. الأشجار تتبادل الكلام مثل أصدقاء قدامى ولا تحب أن يقاطعها أحد. لذلك كل من يقطع شجرة تلاحقه لعنتها فيصبح كأنه مقطوع من شجرة. Trees talk to each other like old friends and don't like to be interrupted. They follow anyone who cuts one of them, turning that person into a lonely cut branch. Is this why in Arabic we say cut off a tree when we mean having no one? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dunya. Ani Gjika will now read from Negative Space, her translations of Luljeta, Lleshanaku in Albanian and in English. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and it's really nice to see everyone, even though I don't see everybody's faces, but it may think of being in class with my students, and it's just more intimate this way to see everyone. Thank you again to Mireni and Adriana for inviting us, for pairing me with Dunya. I'm really grateful, and especially to Griffin Poetry Prize for rewarding translators. I think this is probably the only prize that shows the translator as an author. So thank you for that. I will read 2 poems from Negative Space. One is called Tobacco. So I'll start in Albanian first. Duhani. Këtu të gjithë tymosin, në mbrëmje se cila prej grave e dallon të shoqin prej së largu, nga shkëndia e cigares në fund të rrugës me kaldrëm. Kur shkëndia pulson dendur, gratë ndjejnë stuhin dhe nxitojnë të ngrohin gjella në zjarr. Por kur është e rrallë dhe dembele, si pulsimi prej jodi i kandilave në breg, ato e dinë që duhet të heshtin e t'i lënë vetëm. Në kafen atje ku tre vetë tymosin, i katërti nuk mund të refuzoj cigaren. Nuk mund të mbetesh jashtë zjarrit shamanik, dëshpërimit ngjyrë vjollc, të ofruar me një dorë në zemër. Kur bisedojnë për gratë, hiri i cigares së djegur për gjysëm varet pezull, dhe një shirit i verdh i trash tymi i rrethon si zonën e aksidentit që nuk lejohet ta shkelësh. Më pas njëri prej tyre nis të tregoj se si sapo e ndëshkoi të birin, duke e nisur me dhitë dhe 2 javë të tjera në mal. Heshtje. Ai gërmon xhepat, duke pritur aprovim, por gjen vetëm krunde duhani. Një cigare. Pas saj ndodhe gjithmonë një burr, i cili dikur ishte bariu që urrente të atin, dhe që tani shijon solemnitetin plastik të të qenit i urryer. Daja im pi pafund cigare, gjithashtu. Tavlla e tij është një kërthizë e mbushur me fibrat e robave që plaken në trup, në fundin e ditës. Jashtë në obor, shiu dhe bora nxitojnë të kalbin duqet e cigareve, si të ishin gëzhoja, dëshmia e një lufte pa lavdi, e një lufte civile. Sorry about my voice. I'm coming out of a cold, but hopefully I'm not going to cough too much. So in English, this poem is titled Tobacco. Here, everyone smokes. In the evening, every wife recognizes her respective husband by the faraway glow of his cigarette at the end of a cobblestone street. When the pulse of the glow increases, the wives feel the storm rushing in and hurry to the fire to cook dinner. But when the glow is scarce and lazy, like the dying fluorescence of a jellyfish on the sand, they know they should be quiet and leave the men alone. At the cafe, where 3 people smoke around a table, the 4th cannot refuse a cigarette. You cannot stand outside a shamanic fire, where despair is offered with a hand over the heart. When they talk about women, the ash of the half-burned cigarette hangs expectantly, and a thick yellow ribbon of smoke encircles them, like the police tape at the scene of a crime. Later, one husband starts to share how he has just punished his son by sending him into the mountains with the sheep for 2 weeks. Then he goes quiet. His hands dig into his pockets as he waits for approval, but he only gets tobacco crumbs. A cigarette. There's always a man behind it. A man, once a shepherd, who detested his own father and now savors the solemnity of being hated in return. My uncle, too, smokes nonstop. His ashtray is a navel stuffed with the fibers of each day, aging on his body. Outside in the yard, rain and snow make haste to wipe out whatever discarded cigarette butts as though they were spent shells from a civil war devoid of glory.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
And the other one is titled Via Politica. Jam rritur në një shtëpi të madhe, ku dobësia dhe e folura në mënyrën dëshirore meritonin dëshkim. Dhe jam ndriçuar via politika, me dhjamin e qirinjve të lavdisë së djeshme, i trash, një dhjam i akumuluar në qiej të ftohtë artiku. Fletoret e mia, flokët e mi, zemra ime mbanin erë tym. Tym, afati të cilit numëron të mbrapsh drejt fundit të rezervave dhjamore, drejt zeros absolute. Atëherë pam një qartë njëri tjetrin, ose më mirë atë që kishte mbetur prej nesh. E dëmtuar si numrat pas zgjyrës në një bilet lotarie të gërvishtur me një te. Sa të ndryshëm ishim. Ata me fytyrë të rrumbullakët ishin të drejtët, ata me fytyrë të tërhequr të arsyeshmit. Njëri dëgjonte fshehurazi Puccinin, një tjetër muzikën e muzikës, heshtjen. Më i madhi mbante monologjin në 1 metër katror, një qeli që ja krijonte vetes. Dhe ata që nuk arrita t'i lexoj kishin thjesht diabet. Por sa të ngjashëm ishim në zgrip, të alarmuar si një tuf laraskash që guri më i vogël i ngre të gjitha vrikthi drejt grykës së humnerës. Dhe pastaj u pa që hapësira nuk mjaftonte për të gjithë. U ndam. Disa do të jetonin via parole për të treguar atë që provuan, atë që pan, e kështu përmes rrëfimit të krijonin dhjamin e tyre prej neoni. Të tjerët morën rrugën e përtej oqeanit. Dhe pikërisht ata që shkuan më larg, nuk e zën kur me gojë një histori e bezdishme mbi jetese më pak, duke e fshehur në skutat më të errta të qenies, atje ku për dreq, si dhe me përfumin, aroma reziston shumë herë më gjatë. And this is Via Politica. I grew up in a big house where weakness and expressions of joy deserved punishment. And I was raised on the Via Politica with the grease of yesterday's glories, a thick grease collected under Arctic skies. Hi. Sorry. I was lit up. My notebooks, my hair, my heart reeked of smoke. That's when we saw each other clearly, or rather what remained of us, damaged like lottery numbers scratched away with a blade. how different we were. Those with round faces were righteous. Those with narrow faces were cautious. One listened secretly to Puccini, another to silence, the music's music. The oldest one declaimed monologues inside a 10 by 10-foot cell he had built for himself, and the mysterious ones simply had diabetes. But how similar we were in severe circumstances, alarmed like a flock of magpies that the smallest stone sends into the sky toward the mouth of the abyss. Then it became obvious there wasn't enough space for everyone. We separated. Some went on living via verbum, telling of what they knew, what they witnessed, and so, through their narrative, creating their own Greece. The others crossed over the ocean. And those in particular who went farthest away never speak of their annoying history of wretched survival, burying it in the darkest crevices of their being. Unfortunately, as with perfume, its scent lingers there for much, much longer.
Thank you both so much. This was really, truly powerful. Thank you both, Ani and Dunya. Perhaps just to start us off, could you briefly talk about the poems you just read and why you chose them in particular? And we can start with Dunya.
Marin, so thank you for your son that he prefers poetry more than cartoon. I chose to read The War Works Hard today because I can't stop thinking these days about the war and the suffering of people in Ukraine and what they are going through. It was really like a flashback of my life during the wars in Iraq. This poem is not about a specific war, it's just about war itself. So I remember that I wrote it in one sitting and having in mind all those the war-related activities that I saw on daily basis. I lived them on daily basis, which seemed like any other human activity. So I don't know how much I can say, but this poem has a long story behind it, like a book behind it. But let me say something about the second poem because it's interesting. The second poem, because I chose it because this is about translation, the talk, and this is, I don't know if you noticed, I mean, this was a section from series of tablets that I've been writing. And by the way, this is influenced by the Sumerians, my ancestors. I don't know if you noticed that the Arabic, the section that was not the same length in Arabic and in English. The Arabic ends with the line ends with where I say into a cut branch. I don't need to say something further in Arabic because a cut branch in Arabic is understood. It means having no one. So in order to convey that meaning, I added 4 lines in the English translation. So let me read again those 4 added lines. I said, is this why in Arabic we say cut of a tree when we mean having no one? So I felt free to do that because the poem is mine. So, so I would maybe find a less aggressive solution if I was translating someone else's poems. That's why it's true if we say that translation is never final. Art itself is never final. So this is, debatable. You may think, well, those are not needed, the 4 lines, but I mean, so it's like, it's an open question. I wonder what Ani have in mind.
Yeah. I was just thinking about this, the art is never final, or like when we write our own stuff, we've heard that, okay, I don't remember who said it, but the line that you just have to abandon it, right? One day you keep revising, but then you have to let it go. And with translation, I feel the same because I can keep revising something just like I revise my own. I'm somebody who keeps going back and back and back again.
Thank you both for speaking to us so candidly so far about the poems you chose to read tonight. And I would just love to ask a question about your first encounters with translations. So in an interview with Ahram online, Dunya, when you were asked how you first took up writing, you said, "Writing took me first. During my childhood, there were no books in our home, but my grandmother used to tell me bedtime stories in Aramaic, the language we spoke at home. I had a notebook in which I was writing those stories in my own way in Arabic, the language I learned in school." And you also illustrated these folk tales that your grandmother said. So would you say that was your first encounter with translation, writing down and translating those folk tales? And I'm curious to know how those folk tales impacted your writing and translating ever since.
Yeah, thank you. That was, yeah, you're right. That was my first experience with writing and translating. But I think I did it unconsciously because, I was like 8 or 9 years old that time and was longing. All I wanted was, I wanted to hold that book of which my grandmother said it did not exist. Those were stories told from generation to generation, So, but now that I think about it, there's something funny how I was changing in my notebook. I was changing those stories to make them fit with the mood of a child, like that time. So, for example, like she was my grandmother trying to teach me, she always gives me the lesson behind those stories. So, she was trying to teach me one day about the value of not wasting time, let me say. So she told me the fable about the ant and the grasshopper. Maybe you all know about the story, how the grasshopper spends the summertime playing and singing while the ant is busy all day working to store up food for winter time. And then when winter comes, the grasshopper almost dies from hunger. She didn't work. So, and then she begs the aunt to give her some food, but then she doesn't. The serious aunt would not would not do that. And well, I felt sorry for the grasshopper that time. So there in my bed on the roof of our house in Baghdad, I looked at the stars and and imagined that the grasshopper persuaded the ant to leave her work for a minute and join her play and with her and so in my imagination they would sing together, and at the end the ant does give the grasshopper some food, and they're both happy. Of course I ruined the fable and ruined the but thanks God my grandmother didn't know that I ruined the lesson she wanted to teach me. So it was I wish I kept that notebook. That's why my advice for any young writers, that keep your notebook, you never know. So that was, I illustrated them also. Just it looks like these days I'm illustrating very primitively the tablets, following the tradition of the Sumerians. And that time, of course, I didn't know about tablets, but it looks like it's in my genes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Ani, let's go back to, you were talking about Luljeta, Lleshanaku, and we would love to hear a bit more about why you chose those poems to start today's reading.
Yeah, thank you. So actually, maybe like what Dunya said about the war in Ukraine right now is in our minds, and I picked this too because they seem to be opposites, or like this book. It's called Negative Space, and it has to do with as a photographer, you are more, whenever you click a picture, you look at obviously the subject, but also pay attention to the negative space, which is the area in between the subjects in the foreground. And then these two poems made me think of like there are two opposite types of exposure. Like the tobacco one, there's a couple of different men in the excuse me, there's several men in the picture and also several generations, three of them. And that's like a close-up because it really works, or it stands for like the drama of an individual who's kind of tied or is restricted by tradition. They all seem to be living the same life over and over, and like circle back. The same thing that happened to the father happens to the son, and so on. And then the other poem is more like a long shot because you have the picture, or you have this description of a family, all the members in the family, but then it zooms out to when the family moves away because of either war or in this case maybe the system didn't work out in the country, and so they search for a better life somewhere else. Those people, a lot of those people still have a hard time talking about their past, and I like that what she does is she kind of translates history for us. These are all different moments of looking at history, whether it's an individual history or a country's history. She's really good at portraying all of that. So that's what I like these two. I mean, I like a lot of it, but yeah, that's why I chose these two. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for expanding on that. And I just want to follow up on your first encounter with translation to Ani, because you've been surrounded by languages and poetry from a very young age, and your mother is a poet, and you studied languages in Albania, including English and Italian, and you majored in Russian in high school. And I read that you recounted your origin story as a poet in the National Endowments for the Arts interview, how at age 7 you wrote your first poem, which was a eulogy in response to the death of Enver Hoxha, Albania's dictator. So how did those first childhood encounters with language and literature impact your work now as a poet and as a translator of others?
Yeah, so I think I'm one of those writers who loves imagery, and I will labor over an image for a long time, or like I'm more driven by image. I think I probably see something first, and then it starts from there for me, rather than an idea. And I think maybe that comes from, I think in that interview I mentioned these huge Russian encyclopedias of literature that we had in the house, and when I was a child, they're these big square looking brown leather bound books, encyclopedias. They were too big for my lap, so I would never sit on the couch or anything. I would be on the floor with them and spread them around me, and they had a lot of images. They were all black and white, but I just remember a lot of them still vividly. And I was like, I don't know, maybe 5, 4, 6, that age. A lot of images there, a lot of images in the Albanian myths and legends that I love to read as well. And they're also black and white. So a lot of black and white, but very vivid images. And then my mother, I just remember books were around me because she was a writer. And I remember seeing her book on the shelf and picking it up and thinking, oh my God, this is a book. But I don't know what that means. It's just that my mom made it. And I think I had those first desires that maybe I want to make one too in the future back then. And but I think, yeah, I was fed images, or I discovered images myself through the books that were there. And just that plus languages. I think by learning different languages, maybe I was more aware of languages like a cloth, maybe like dressing. It's like a certain phrase will fit better than, or fits differently in one language than in another. And therefore, if I'm revising, I'm paying attention to what fits better. Sorry, this is a long-winded.
Beautiful.
Answer, but yeah, it's just excuse me.
These are great answers. Thank you so much. it actually reminds me of what Khalid said in our last conversation talks. He was talking about translation as almost putting on a persona, like a fictional persona when translating. And so, Annie, what you're saying, like changing cloth or changing almost costumes when writing brings forth another kind of voice. So I'm just the resonance is interesting there. I just wanted to perhaps go back to what Dunya said before. And Dunya, when you were talking about how you translated your own poem, right? Or you sort of you took more liberties, right, with the translation of your poems because you were translating it. It's your poem. And I was just really, really interested in the relationship you have to self-translation. So in the author's note of your poetry collection in Her Feminine Sign, you say, and I'm going to quote you here, I wrote these poems from right to left and from left to right in Arabic and in English. I didn't translate them. I only wrote them twice. Writing these poems in 2 languages makes a new, quote unquote, original. To capture the poem in 2 lives is to mirror my exile with all of its possibilities and risks. So I wonder if you could speak a little more about the relationship between translation and writing twice. What is the difference there for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's a process where I allow some type of communication between the text in Arabic and the text in English. They behave like true lovers, which means that they develop together without imposing too much on each other. Art for me is a work in progress with doubts and probabilities. So translating my work gives me a wider space to understand my original work, work in its original language better, and to diagnose its flaws. So when I translate someone else, I'm faithful, more faithful than when I do mine. So, but what does that mean? What does faithful mean anyway, if we ask? So does it mean that strict fidelity to literal meaning? Does it mean producing a text that sounds as if it was written in the language to which it is being translated? To what extent we as translators are empowered to recreate? So how much of the foreignness in the original text can we preserve in crossing from one language to another? So any serious translator would be concerned about these issues. So I think Susan Sontag said something like how translation is carrying across. I agree. To translate is to carry across. So in moving from one language to another, however, we carry ourselves across the borders, and sometimes while we do that, we smuggle our own stuff, which I mean our foreignness, to the second language. I would like to, I remember Edward Hirsch said something in this regard. I love what he says also. He says, we need the sound of our words to delineate the state of our beings.
Beautiful. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I really like what you said about translation or the translator being empowered, I just, and to sort of actually rewrite or recreate the poem. Often a translator, there are different ways of translating, of course, but I think there's always a reverence, towards the original, and hence, the impulse to stay like faithful, quote unquote. But I really like, I like to reimagine this relationship through your words, Dunya. And I guess related to that as well, you publish in Her Feminine Sign both in Arabic and in English, but the two versions remain separate, although the genesis of the text is in conversation. And they're published with two different publishing houses. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to that decision. Why did you choose to publish the two languages separately?
Well, the two versions are in conversation, but they don't have to live together. And yeah, they develop together in the page, but when it's time for publishing, they're allowed to go in different directions. So only if there is a reason that they become together, like now the project I have in mind working for the future. I don't want to ruin the surprise, but there's a reason that they come together, if only when they have to.
Right. I like that. Does it have anything to do also with readership or audiences or no?
No, no.
Mm-hmm.
It is themselves together.
Right.
Is their how they like, just like humans. I mean, yeah, the time comes when they separate.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean they don't converse with each other.
Right. Thank you.
In a way, they truly are like lovers. I love it when you said they behave like lovers, not imposing too much on each other, but these two books, they even live in separate houses. Thank you, Dunya. I have a question for Ani, because you mentioned in a past interview that translators are something of a midwife in the sense that they arrive through the powers of language and imagination at the moment the text was coming to life and, like you say, deliver it again in a new language. So can you speak more to this and perhaps even give an example? And Miren and I were curious, do you see the labor of translation as being gendered in any way?
That's a great question. Gendered? No, not at all. Like, I think all of us have, all of us have unique ways of working or seeing language, or working with language in maybe complex ways or original ways, so that I would love to see anybody try. I mean, definitely work with translation, anyone, no limitations. But yeah, this idea of the midwife, because I think it's what Dunya mentioned also, that somebody who carries over. You are, as a translator, you are a linguistic traveler. You are mediator. You are like a medium in a way, right? We're working with two living things, sort of, like one is already alive, like the original, and then you have the knowledge that the other one is alive too, but you just have to carry it over, or you have to arrive at it. Maybe that's better. You have to arrive at it. And when I think of this, I think of I love to, so when I translate, I start with initially just putting the thing down in the English language as best as I can. And that's not really the fun part for me. The fun part is to work with what I have now and see where can I arrive with it. So like, I see the text that I've produced, the English version, more as more like code, or like the breadcrumbs from Hansel and Gretel that will lead me to where it needs to arrive, rather than what's the destination, like how do I make this work in English so that it mirrors the original. So I see it as like a possibility, the translation process and the revision of the translation process. I just see that as a possibility to see better, like to push myself harder, to arrive better. There's that fail better, fail once, fail again, fail better. I just think with translation, we need to arrive better, maybe not in the sense that, oh my God, look what I can do better than the original writer, but like that art is, I think Dunya mentioned infinite, or the possibilities of what art can do. And so in the process of translation, you are you should take more chances and push further.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. And I'm just going to remember to add your translation of Luljeta Lleshanaku to the chat negative space, just in case anyone would like to check it out, purchase it. It's an incredible book. Thank you so much. And Dunya, why did you choose the title In Her Feminine Sign for your 2019 collection of poetry that came out with New Directions? What insights are gained through that particular position of the working of languages, maybe their biases, the way they shape the way we relate to gender and sexuality? Can you speak a bit more to that?
Yes, I teach Arabic language, and in Arabic, we have a symbol that's not a part of the letters, but it's important symbol that we call ta' marbuta, and that is, you can turn, like, that is the feminine symbol, like that's how we recognize is when you turn it into feminine, the word feminine, that symbol. And in Arabic, al-ghariba bita'iha al-marbuta is really, let me be honest, is very strong title, al-ghariba bita'iha al-marbuta. But the problem in English, you can't, if you translate it literally, it doesn't make sense, because literally means the stranger in her tied circle. Tied circle is that symbol. Tied circle is like a circle like this. So if you say the stranger in her tied circle, it's like, I don't know if it's understood the way it is in Arabic. Mm-hmm. But the tied circle, the reason, like, I've been teaching Arabic and I know this symbol from before. Why did I use it now in this? It actually obsessed me starting in the year 2014, August 2014, when I said, wow, like, I was watching, like, it was, that's when there was a market open in Iraq, Syria, elsewhere online to buy and sell women by ISIS, Daesh, we call them ISIS members. They considered women, spoils of war, as property. And I saw that there, even that I saw that the females were actually, I see that circle, they had tied hands even. And this kind of, that tight circle obsessed me more. So then later, when I had the chance to listen to some of those stories of the women, and that's when I felt so responsible, and I had tried to raise their voices or have their voices heard. That's through my book, The Beekeeper, Rescuing the Stolen Woman of Iraq, which was my first nonfiction. Mm-hmm. And that is how it came to be. And in between those stories of the woman, I wrote these poems that are in this collection. So that's how the In Her Feminine Sign was formed. It was quiet but furious.
Mm-hmm.
Quiet but furious. I love that. Yeah, I wanted maybe to turn to another topic, or something that you both have. I mean, you're both poets and translators, but you also share something in your through your biographical backgrounds, is that you both lived under dictatorships. Ani, you under Enver Hoxha in Albania, and Dunya under Saddam Hussein in Iraq. And Ani, in an interview, you said, I do think that growing up under a totalitarian government has made me more of an observer. I felt watched, and I practiced a lot of watching right back. Did this affect in any way your writing and your translations?
Does it affect? Yeah, definitely. I listen, I guess, a lot to language, not in the sense that I'm sitting here and I see words, but maybe when the words are on the page, I'm listening to the sounds they're making together, or where they could lead, or but to go back to growing up under a dictatorship, I think I was a child during the time that Enroja was still alive. I was 7 when he died, and there was like another period of maybe 5 years after that where things were still not sure what was happening, and then finally the regime collapsed in 1991, I think. So cold, maybe you can help if I made a mistake. And then so it, to me, I think living under dictatorship as a child has made me have this way of seeing, or if I look back at it and describe it, I think I'm able maybe to see it more clearly than somebody who was an adult then, because the adults at the time were more maybe paranoid, or like things are so unknown what's happening from moment to moment that you like your mind is not your own in a way. So I think a child's perspective writing about those times is very different, and I don't know, maybe being that observer, that listener, children see the truth in a different way from adults, and they do notice things. So I think that has helped me in my translation, because I'm trying to notice. I'm trying to still pay attention and not be afraid maybe as much, or not be afraid to try something more different. Maybe. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer again. Dictatorship, yeah, 21. Okay, thank you so much.
No, that was great. Thank you, Ani. And Dunya, would you like to say something about your experience of growing up or living under a dictatorship? I mean, there's this quote from Guernica magazine in which you say, when I was in Iraq, censorship was our annoying reader hidden behind the true good readers. As a writer, I faced a great challenge: how to be understood by the true reader and not by the censors. Would you like to talk about the censorship and how censorship might have influenced your writing and self-translations?
Yeah, and then and we don't have the habit tradition in Iraq or in the Arab worlds in general. We don't have the tradition, by the way, of having editors. Like our work would not be edited and be published as is. So it was a blessing to have editors instead of censors. But in Iraq, we had a building, an actual building that was called censorship department, and it had actual employees, and job description of those employees was to make sure like what's published morally is suitable, or like it's good enough morally to read or not to read. And so no book would go to print without their permission. So I wanted to publish, but at the same time, it was risky, but I wanted to say what I wanted to say. So I depended on metaphors, of course, and in the hope that they would not be understood by the censors. So, but still, I got some, I was kind of in trouble. So one of them pretended, he came to my office in the Baghdad Observer. I was working as a journalist. And he came and pretended he was a journalist. And I knew from his questions, and I knew the journalist colleagues, he was not one of them. So he was saying, what do you mean by this image? What do you mean by that metaphor? And so I pretended he was actually an actual and a real journalist. So I answered him how I would answer a real one. So I said, it's not the task of the writer to say what she means, it's the task of the reader. Things like that, to get around this interrogation. But that was the most really annoying building that in Baghdad, that I think that was main reason that I wanted to leave, to publish. So to kind of not, I love, of course, metaphors serve poetry, but I didn't want to use them as shields all the time, as protective tools. So it was like, it was strange how all the things, sometimes even funny uh, um, things happened because it was not only me, the other writers also were trying to do that. And how we would this is like codes, like as if we're talking in codes, and we understand each other, and it's like another language we had between us to protect us. For example, one day I published a poem, Pronouns, which is in the last poem in the World Works Hard, where I say about general and war, and the person who published it in the newspaper is also a poet, and he's like, we speak that language of the codes language, and he said, you know what? If someone asks, it's risky, I'll publish it and just say this is Schwarzkopf. Like he would tell me what to say if somebody asks, who's this general? Say this is American general or whatever. Like, so this, how like this, like tricks. But that was funny that time, or was maybe like, but you as a serious writer, you don't want to live always like that. So, and writing was essential part, still essential part of me. So I wanted to be myself, that's all.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dunya and Ani, for your reflections on this subject. It makes me think of poets from my own country of Romania and how they dealt with censorship under Ceausescu's regime, including one of my favorites, Ana Blandiana. So I appreciate your thoughts very much on this subject. Ani shared in the chat that her mother had this exact experience with her poetry in the 1970s. Is there anything else, Ani, you'd like to add to that?
There is some in my memoir, so maybe I shouldn't say more. Yeah,
well,
my memoir comes out next year. Yeah. Thank you, though. Yeah.
We can wait for your memoir next year, right?
Yeah.
Can't wait for that. So switching gears a little bit, we'd love to know, as our kind of final question before we open it up to audience questions, your relationships with your translators. Dunya, you have worked with Elizabeth Winslow, Kareem James Abu Zeid, who both translated more than a single book of yours. And I also read that you first wrote The Beekeeper in Arabic, and then you co-translated it to English with Max Weiss, which was a process that you described as both joyous and very difficult, because as you mentioned, you often edit your original work many times when you work on a translation. So can you talk about how your relationship with your translators of your own poetry has evolved over time, and what emerges out of this sort of sustained engagement with them?
Yes, and by the way, I love what Annie said about translator as midwife. That will stay in my mind. It was lucky for me to be translated by the translators that you, Adriana, mentioned. That was they are very brilliant, and but it's better maybe for the translators. It's more fair when the writer doesn't know the language, the target language, for example. So English, yani. I don't know Italian, for example. So, but I blindly trust Alina Shiti, who translated. Because you only know the translators into English. I also appreciate. I'm grateful for the other translators into other languages. For example, Alina Shiti, who translated a couple of my books into Italian. I don't know Italian, but from her questions, I just trust that she did excellent work, I'm sure. And, that's a happier relationship when I don't know the language. So when I know the language, even if it is not that much I know, it's limited knowledge, as you see, it's not my first language. But that makes me want to interfere sometimes in the translation. So, and one of my bad habits as a writer is to keep going back like to those texts and trying to, as if like I want to make changes always in my writing. It's really bad habit. that becomes unfair for translators, especially like if this happens after they finish, translating the work. So what they thought was final draft, and then it was not. It's work in progress always. So I think the best thing is for my advice is to translate dead writers, because the dead writers cannot make any changes to their work.
Thanks, Dunya. I'll keep that in mind, and I'll have to look for your Italian translations over here and see how they compare to the English, at least. So Ani, in translating Luljeta and Lleshanaku, her negative space, can you give us a glimpse in how you collaborated with the poet, and not just her, but of course you've translated your mom and Kosovar poets. So let us know a little bit about your collaborations and how they usually play out.
Yeah, so I'll go back to Dunya's description of true lovers, right? I think with my case with Luljeta, it was like the best relationship I've ever had because first of all, I was really young, or I mean, at least 10 years ago, and I wasn't as engaged with so much like writing or teaching as I am right now. My book had just been published, and so I wasn't writing anything at the time. So, and I loved her poetry, and so I was fully dedicated. And she was also very open to communicating with me about anything. I had questions, she would answer right away. So it was just the attention she would give me was so needed, and it made a difference in learning how to trust myself. And the fact that she would always respond, that was one. And then maybe because she understands some English, I would check with her, like, do you like it this way? Like I would ask her if she liked this version or this version. Also because I was younger in the job as a translator, right? So I would doubt myself. But it was a great experience because I learned so much. And then with the other people that I've been translating, like my mother, or Kosovar poet Jevdet Bayrai, or someone I'm currently translating, Visarjiti, I think I'm more confident in knowing what to do. So I just make a list of questions and then ask them. But then I'm mostly involved with the translation process on my own until I feel more confident to show something to them. So I don't think I'm bugging them with as many messages as I would with Luljeta, or I mean, she never felt that I was bugging her, but I just know we had so much communication between us that has never happened with others. But having this openness, right, this to ask questions and not feel limited by the author, that was truly a gift. So that was a great experience, and all the others are too, but they're different. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for these very insightful and profound answers. So I guess we could open it up to the audience for whoever has a question for Ani and Dunya. Please just raise your hand or just unmute yourself and jump in and ask your question. You can also type your question. Yes, perfect. So we have a question from Vicky. I'm going to read it. Ani and Dunya, thank you for your moving readings and the warmth and generosity which you shared your writing and translation experience. It's not a question. It's a thank you note for Ani and Dunya from Vicky, who thanks you for sharing your writing and translation experience and insights. Yeah. Thank you, Vicky. Anyone can just also type your questions, okay, in the chat. So this is from Alain. What are the most helpful tool you both use when translating?
feel like maybe the page, like trust learning to see the page as a sandbox where you can play and be okay with maybe playing for a while rather than, okay, how to make this perfect or how to arrive at that destination I mentioned earlier, what the translated version should look like, having this idea of what it should look like. No, just maybe do more playing. Is that a tool? I think, yeah. Just...
Dunya, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not sure about what tool, but because maybe it's not different from the tool for writing, for art in general. When you translate someone else, for me, it's a chance for like a reading, being in another soul. And I think Ilya Kaminsky said something about not to look when you're not looking in the mirror and seeing only yourself. So you look through the window to see the outside world, something like that. I'm just paraphrasing his saying, which is beautiful. And so it is maybe the same tool that we use for creating art, for writing itself, except that it is you're taking, like, let's say sometimes you hear something like writer's block. So they say, okay, so how do I recover this? Maybe that's one of the ways, if you happen to know another language. So that's when you go there, and that's how you recover. Or if you don't know another language, then reading that translated work also may help with that. So that's a reminder when we have a block. It's a reminder. It's time to read or to translate.
Thank you. So I think we have another question from Miriam. Thank you so much for this encounter. I do have a question for you both. Have you recently read a translation from a language you don't know that you would recommend?
The Ukrainian poets, I think, just most recent, right? So I was reading, I posted about this on my Facebook page, but during the reading that Caroline Forsch and some other writers organized and invited the Ukrainian poets and translators, and this is available online too. I think it was called Worlds Apart, Words Together, or Words Together, Worlds Apart. I think it's the series. And a lot of the work that was shared that night or that day was really moving. And some of the names, I mean, the one I remember is Yulia, but the last name is escaping, so I'm just scrolling down through my Facebook page. Okay, it's Yulia Lyuba Yakimchuk. I'll put this in the chat.
And I've added the YouTube recording to the chat as well. Oh. It's a beautiful reading. Thank you.
It looks like there is more translation. I noticed that is being done from English to other languages than vice versa. So we do need more, languages to be translated also into English. And these days, of course, I'm curious, like all of you, about, let's say, literature from Ukraine. But we don't want this to be always when these wars and occasions like these to remind us. But that's the reality. But we do need to hear from, as many voices of the world as possible here. I translate into Arabic. It's more comfortable for me to translate from English to Arabic than the other way, because so that it's they're eager, like in Iraq, for example, eager to read American poetry. They're so happy when something is translated, and a lot of books are published in Arabic. Like when I was young, when I started, I was reading a lot of translated literature. There was a lot of available translated literature into Arabic. While I don't see that same equality, like not so much translated here into English from other languages. So I think that's need, to have more wider space in this here. But I don't have particular names if that's what you mean, because I'm always afraid that I forget others. So I'm always sensitive not to mention certain names.
Thank you. I see another question here from Janie Edwards, a wonderful poet in Edmonton, who has also translated her own mother. She says, the Canadian poet Stephen Heighton exhorts every poet to attempt translation even when they're not competent or fluent in the poem's language. What do you think of that advice?
Should I'm sorry. Yeah. So I'm actually the opposite. English, which is the language I translate into, is not my first language, but I have tried working this way with, say, Greek, or I don't know anything about Greek language. And then I've done it with my students. So I have ESL students, English as students to whom I teach the English language. But sometimes I've tried translation with them as a way to build new vocabulary. And because they're engaging with language in such an intense and creative way, they do remember a lot of words. So they have been trying with languages they don't even know. Like I have given Chinese people Albanian poems, or a Greek one also by Sappho. But I would provide maybe the trot. So like they didn't have any knowledge of that language. But if you have some knowledge, I still think it's an opportunity to see what you can learn in the process, or to challenge yourself. So it's good practice because it makes you aware of word choice and the endless possibilities of word choices.
I agree with you. It's a good practice, but I would say that maybe co-translating in this case, because that's hard to when you don't know the language, but maybe you can co-translate with someone else.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Now, do you have questions for each other, Ani or Dunya, for one another?
I'm just so happy that we met here. And if we were in person, I wish I could hug you right now.
So,
yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Same here.
And Adriana and Mireni.
I this should happen in person sometime soon. I think it's about time to, this is also a blessing that otherwise maybe hard to see all the you guys, everyone here, but always in person, of course, is more fun. So hopefully in the future that happens.
Mm-hmm. Well, unless we have other questions, I think we can call it a night, unless anyone else wants to ask something.
I see one more question here by Sokol Shunga.
Right. Oh, yes. And so Sokol is asking, in Nostalgia of Tarkovsky, there is a dialogue line that goes, "Poetry is untranslatable, like the whole of art. I'm curious about your opinion. Is poetry untranslatable?"
Can I say something? It's an interesting question, and it's I don't believe that there's something untranslatable on technical level, but on emotional level, actually poetry, I believe, is translating the untranslatable. So that's poetry. So what is translatable, you do in prose. What's untranslatable, you do in poetry. And so, but also something else came in mind, that some unfair Arabic proverb that says something like, translating poetry is turning a Persian carpet to the other side, which means like the Persian carpet is the best carpet in the world. In the world is beautiful, but when you turn it to the other side, you only see faded images of those original ones. I think it's unfair proverb, but just it came to my mind. But I think that is what poetry is actually, to translate the untranslatable.
That's beautiful, and that's also a very beautiful image. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not gonna add anything because I really like that as well. Seriously, that's I hadn't thought of it, but it makes sense to me as well.
Beautiful.
Well, thank you. Really, thank you both so much for this truly generous and thought-provoking discussion. And thank you everyone for coming, especially our two poet translators, Ani and Dunya. So we have recorded this event and we will be sharing it on our SoundCloud as a podcast. And just stay tuned and we will let you know how to access the recording. You can follow us on our social media channels. Another announcement is that the Griffin Poetry Prize shortlist will be announced on April 13. So mark your calendars. Our judges this year are Adam Dickinson, Valgina Moore, and Claudia Rankin. As I said, please follow us on our social media, and thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you. And just to wrap up this beautiful event, we would love to invite Ani and Dunya to read one last poem for us.
Do you want to start, Ani?
Did you want me to read something of my own or a translation?
Yes, please. Yes, a poem of your own would be wonderful.
Okay. Maybe I'll just do the short one. Okay, this is Inarticulate. I have no memory of it. I believe a river caught up with us when we curved the foot of the mountain. Men and women got off the bus to drink. My father cupped his hands and I gulped mouthfuls. Snow patches led the way to the cool black smoke of the woods. Over our heads, eagles played tag with the white sun. The way we changed the valley, entering it like winter shadows. I never dream of it, but I remember being watched as I stood at the edge of water, stirring images with my foot. Thank you so much again for everybody, to everyone for being here.
Thank you. Beautiful. I will read also a short poem. I just read it in English from In Her Feminine Science collection. 100 Years of Sleep. I don't want to be the princess. I only want to be her sleep for 100 years. I want to skip the problems of the 21st century. Water pollution, killing virus, nuclear war, capsized boats that carry immigrants away from their homelands. I may miss important inventions and the new songs and weekends when people go out on their dates, followed by one moon. I may open my eyes for a moment to take a glimpse of the universe in its beauty and then close them again. But what if my loved ones surrounded me and whispered in my ear one by one? I would wake up, of course. Thank you and have a very good evening.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.